Hello, dear story lovers. At the amount of 1,000 subscribers, I will post a huge series of special stories for you. Subscribe now. The summer heat shimmered over the small town of Willow's Edge as a massive shadow darkened the midday sun. The object overhead was no plane, no satellite, but something far more extraordinary, an alien vessel descending from the heavens. The ship, larger than the tallest skyscraper, pulsed with a faint blue light as it hovered above the open fields on the outskirts of town. Its surface, smooth and almost liquid-like, reflected the terrified faces of the townsfolk who had gathered to witness the impossible. Among them was Mia Carter, a 15-year-old girl with scruffy sneakers, a head full of unkempt brown curls, and eyes wide with awe. Unlike most of the adults cowering behind fences and vehicles, Mia stood at the front of the crowd, clutching her sketchbook tightly to her chest. For as long as she could remember, she had been fascinated by the idea of life beyond Earth. Her room was filled with posters of planets, constellations, and illustrations of imagined alien creatures she had drawn herself. But no drawing could have prepared her for this moment. The ship's descent caused a soft hum to ripple through the air, and then silence. A section of the hull slid open with mechanical precision, revealing an otherworldly staircase that unfolded down to the ground. From the opening, tall, slender beings began to emerge. Their shimmering blue skin seemed to refract light like the surface of a crystal, and their elongated limbs moved with an elegance that made them seem both ethereal and intimidating. The Zarquil, as they would soon introduce themselves, wore garments woven with threads of light, and their large, opalescent eyes scanned the humans with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some people knelt, others ran, but Mia stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. One of the aliens stepped forward, a Zarquil ambassador, his stature slightly taller than the others. His voice, when he spoke, was both melodic and sharp, a strange mix of musical tones and guttural sounds. A translator device mounted on his arm projected his words in English. "We are the Zarquil," he said. "We come not to conquer, but to observe. Your planet, primitive as it may be, holds some interest to us. Select individuals will accompany us aboard our ship for cultural exchange." The ambassador's eyes swept across the crowd, pausing momentarily on Mia, who was gripping her sketchbook so tightly her knuckles were white. His gaze lingered before moving on. "You have nothing to fear," he added, though his tone carried a hint of amusement. "We are merely curious." The crowd erupted into whispers and cries of disbelief. Mia's heart pounded. This was her chance, a chance to see the stars, to meet beings from another world, to learn what no one else on Earth had ever known. Before she could stop herself, Mia stepped forward. The ambassador's gaze snapped back to her, and a ripple of surprise crossed his otherwise unreadable face. "Bold," he murmured, loud enough for only the nearest humans to hear. He gestured for her to approach, his lips curling into something that might have been a smirk. The crowd gasped, and Mia felt dozens of pairs of eyes on her, but she forced herself to take another step. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, warning her to never draw attention to herself, but Mia pushed it aside. This moment was bigger than her fears. "What is your name, child?" the ambassador asked, his tone laced with curiosity. "Mia Carter," she said, her voice trembling but steady enough to carry. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. A low, melodic chuckle escaped the ambassador, and several of the other Zarquil joined in, their laughter strange and musical. "A brave one, it seems. And yet, so small." The Zarquil continued to chuckle, and Mia felt her cheeks flush. Her heart thudded as doubt began to creep in, but she refused to shrink back. Instead, she squared her shoulders and asked, "If you're here to learn about us, why not start with someone who's curious about you?" The ambassador's laughter stopped abruptly. The humans around her collectively held their breath. For a moment, there was silence as the Zarquil studied her with a piercing intensity. Then he extended a long, elegant hand toward her. "Very well, Mia Carter," he said. "You may join us." Perhaps your curiosity will entertain us." As his words echoed through the translator, the crowd erupted into chaos, some shouting in protest, others watching in stunned silence. But Mia felt nothing but exhilaration. This was her chance. She placed her hand in his, her palm dwarfed by his elongated fingers, and stepped forward. The ambassador led her toward the ship, his stride slow and deliberate. As they ascended the staircase, Mia glanced back at the crowd one last time. Her mother was there, her face pale with fear, but her expression unreadable. Mia wanted to call out, to reassure her, but the moment passed too quickly. The alien staircase pulled her away from everything she had ever known. As the ship's doors closed behind her with a faint hiss, Mia realized she was stepping into the unknown. Excitement mixed with apprehension churned in her stomach, but she refused to let fear take hold. This was what she had always dreamed of. She didn't yet realize how cruelly the Zarquil would test her or how deeply her courage would be challenged. Mia's first steps aboard the Zarquil ship felt like stepping into another dimension. The interior was unlike anything she could have imagined. The walls seemed to ripple with color, shifting from deep purples to electric blues, as though the ship itself were alive. Strange, floating lights illuminated the corridors, casting faint halos that danced across the surfaces. The air was crisp, carrying an unfamiliar but not unpleasant scent, like a mix of ozone and lavender. The Zarquil led Mia down a corridor so vast it felt more like an endless, glowing tunnel. Other Zarquil beings watched her as she passed, their opalescent eyes narrowing in curiosity or disdain. Some whispered to one another in their melodic, chirping language, and though she couldn't understand their words, the tones made their meaning clear. They were laughing at her. The ambassador, who had introduced himself as Korath, stopped before an enormous archway. The doors slid open without a sound, revealing a chamber filled with an overwhelming array of alien wonders. Holographic displays floated in midair, showing galaxies spinning in breathtaking detail. Exotic plants grew from translucent orbs suspended in the air, their leaves shimmering with bioluminescence. The center of the room held a long, low table, surrounded by sleek, gravity-defying chairs. "This will be your space for learning," Korath said, gesturing to the room. "Observe and adapt, little human. You may find your species lacks much to offer." Mia bit her tongue to hold back a retort. The Zarquil's condescension was grating, but she was determined not to let them see her frustration. Instead, she focused on her surroundings, her curiosity outweighing her indignation. She stepped forward, running her fingers lightly over the edge of the table, which felt cool and smooth, like polished glass. "Impressive, isn't it?" came a voice behind her. She turned to see another Zarquil, shorter and leaner than Korath, but with the same shimmering skin. He smirked at her, the expression unnervingly similar to human arrogance. "You must be overwhelmed, primitive as you are." Mia stiffened. "It's incredible," she said evenly. "But maybe you'd be surprised at what humans are capable of." The Zarquil chuckled, a series of light, mocking trills. "We shall see. Try not to embarrass yourself too much." He sauntered off, leaving Mia alone with her thoughts. She clenched her fists, then released them with a sigh. They wanted her to feel small, insignificant. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The next few days aboard the ship were a blur of wonder and humiliation. The Zarquil subjected her to a series of tests, seemingly designed to highlight her primitive nature. They placed her in front of alien technology, laughing as she fumbled to understand how it worked. They asked her questions about Earth's science and culture, only to mock her answers with their superior knowledge. But Mia refused to break. Every failure was an opportunity to learn. She observed how the Zarquil moved, how they interacted with their technology, and how they communicated. Slowly, she began to piece together fragments of their language, surprising them with her quick adaptation. Her sketches, once of imagined aliens, now captured the intricate designs of their ship and the subtle expressions on their faces. Still, the loneliness weighed on her. She missed the familiar comfort of her mother's voice, the warmth of the sun on her skin, and the simple joy of being surrounded by people who cared for her. The Zarquil, for all their intellect, seemed cold and detached. She often wondered if they had ever felt love or kindness, or if their quest for knowledge had left them hollow. One night, or what she assumed was night, as the concept of day didn't exist aboard the ship, Mia wandered the corridors, unable to sleep. She followed the faint hum of energy emanating from deeper within the vessel. Turning a corner, she found herself before a large, sealed door. A faint glow leaked from its edges, and a strange, low growl resonated from within. Curiosity burning in her chest, Mia approached the door. As she reached out, it slid open silently, revealing a massive chamber bathed in red light. At the center of the room stood a creature so enormous it took her breath away. It was feline in appearance, with sleek, jet-black fur that seemed to swallow the light around it. Its eyes glowed an intense crimson, and its muscles rippled as it paced in a massive enclosure surrounded by a shimmering energy field. The creature exuded both power and grace, its presence commanding respect and fear. Mia gasped softly, and the creature's ears twitched. It turned its head sharply, its glowing eyes locking onto her. For a moment, she was paralyzed, her instincts screaming at her to run. But something in its gaze held her still, something that felt less like predatory intent and more like curiosity. Slowly, Mia stepped closer to the energy field. The creature didn't growl or snarl. Instead, it lowered its massive head and took a cautious step toward her, its movements eerily silent. Its crimson eyes studied her, unblinking. Mia swallowed hard, then spoke in a shaky whisper. "You're not so scary," she said, unsure if she was trying to convince the creature or herself. To her astonishment, the creature knelt, bowing its head until its snout nearly touched the floor. Mia's heart raced. She felt no fear now, only an overwhelming sense of awe. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment. Mia turned to see Korath and several other Zarquils staring at her, their usually impassive faces etched with shock. "The Kralix," Korath said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It bowed to you." "What's a Kralix?" Mia asked, her voice steady despite the weight of their stares. Korath's expression hardened, his condescending tone returning. "It is our apex predator. Our enforcer. It bows to no one." The Zarquil murmured amongst themselves, their musical tones laced with disbelief. Mia glanced back at the Kralix, which still knelt before her, its crimson eyes calm but focused. A strange sense of connection surged through her, as though the creature saw something in her that the Zarquil never could. For the first time since arriving aboard the ship, Mia smiled. "Maybe it just doesn't like bullies," she said. The Zarquil fell silent, their expressions unreadable. But one thing was clear: Mia had just shattered their expectations, and nothing aboard the ship would ever be the same again. The chamber erupted into a storm of activity. Zarquil scientists poured into the room, their melodic voices rising in astonishment as they swarmed around the Kralix's enclosure. The enormous feline, however, remained still, its glowing crimson eyes locked on Mia. Korath strode forward, his tall frame taut with tension as he gestured for the scientists to back away. "This is impossible," Korath muttered, his voice sharp as a blade. "The Kralix is engineered to obey no one. It does not bow, even to us." Mia, still standing near the shimmering barrier of the Kralix's enclosure, crossed her arms. "Well, it seems like your Kralix has a mind of its own." Korath shot her a glare, his opalescent eyes narrowing. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I didn't do anything." Mia snapped, though her heart was pounding. "I just walked in here. Maybe it likes me." "Likes you?" Korath's voice dripped with disdain. "The Kralix is not capable of such primitive emotions." "Then explain this," Mia countered, gesturing to the massive creature, which was still kneeling, its head lowered in deference. Korath opened his mouth to respond, but another Zarquil, one of the scientists, interrupted. Ambassador, she said, her tone tinged with hesitation, perhaps the human possesses some unique trait that the Kralix responds to. We should study this. Koratha's expression darkened, but he nodded curtly. Fine. Take the Kralix to the observation deck. And bring the human. Mia's protest died on her lips as the scientists deactivated the barrier, the shimmering energy fading into nothingness. The Kralix rose gracefully to its full height, towering over everyone in the room. It stepped out of its enclosure, its massive paws making no sound on the floor, and moved to stand beside Mia. The Zarquil scientists gawked, their astonishment growing with every second. The creature leaned down, its glowing eyes meeting Mia's, and let out a low, rumbling purr. Mia tentatively reached out a hand, her fingers brushing against its sleek, midnight black fur. The texture was softer than she had expected, like velvet. The purring grew louder, vibrating through her hand and into her chest. The Zarquil watched in stunned silence. The observation deck was a vast, circular room with walls of transparent material that offered an uninterrupted view of the galaxy. Stars glittered like diamonds against the black canvas of space, and a nearby nebula glowed with swirling hues of pink and blue. Mia couldn't help but marvel at the beauty, even as the tension in the room thickened. The Kralix sat beside her, its tail curling around her feet. The Zarquil had stationed guards at the entrances, their unease evident despite their stoic expressions. Korath paced in front of her, his movements sharp and agitated. This connection defies logic, Korath said, his voice strained. The Kralix is our creation, designed for obedience and loyalty to the Zarquil alone. It is impossible for it to bond with an outsider, especially a human. Mia raised an eyebrow. Well, maybe it's tired of being treated like a weapon. Did you ever think of that? Korath stopped pacing and turned to her, his expression cold. Do not presume to lecture us on matters you cannot comprehend. Then explain it to me, Mia shot back. You're so smart, why do you think this is happening? Korath opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly struggling for an answer. One of the scientists stepped forward, holding a small device that pulsed with light. Ambassador, the scientist said, we've analyzed the Kralix's brainwave patterns since it bonded with the human. There's an anomaly, something we've never seen before. It's as though the creature is responding to her emotional state. Emotional state? Korath echoed, incredulous. Yes, the scientist confirmed. The human's emotions, fear, curiosity, even kindness appear to influence the Kralix's behavior. It's unprecedented. Mia frowned. So, what? It likes that I'm nice to it? The scientist hesitated. In a manner of speaking, yes. The Kralix seems to recognize and respond to emotions that align with trust and empathy. Mia glanced down at the Kralix, which was now purring softly, its glowing eyes half closed. She thought back to the moment they had first met. She hadn't felt fear then, not really. She had felt awe, and maybe even a little understanding. Was that what the Kralix had sensed? Korath scoffed. Ridiculous. The Kralix is a product of advanced Zarquil engineering. It is not some sentimental pet. Maybe that's the problem, Mia said quietly. You treat it like a machine, but it's alive. It has feelings, even if you don't want to admit it. Korath's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. The room fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the soft hum of the ship and the steady purring of the Kralix. Over the next several days, Mia and the Kralix became the subject of endless observation. The Zarquil ran test after test, trying to understand the bond between them. They placed Mia in controlled environments, introducing stimuli designed to provoke emotional responses. To their amazement, the Kralix's behavior mirrored Mia's emotions almost perfectly. When Mia was calm, the Kralix was docile. When she was nervous, it became alert. And when she was threatened, such as when a Zarquil guard accidentally raised a weapon too close to her, the Kralix's transformation was immediate and terrifying. Its sleek body tensed, its fur bristling as it let out a thunderous roar that shook the room. The guard dropped his weapon, retreating in terror. The scientists documented everything, their awe growing with each new discovery. But for Mia, the bond went beyond science. She felt a deep connection to the Kralix, as though it understood her in a way no one else ever had. It wasn't just a protector, it was a friend. One evening, as Mia sat on the observation deck, gazing out at the stars, Korath approached her. His usual arrogance was absent, replaced by a rare solemnity. "You've changed the way we see the Kralix," he said, his tone begrudging. "Perhaps even the way we see ourselves." Mia glanced at him, surprised. "Does that mean you're finally going to stop treating it like a weapon?" Korath hesitated, then nodded. "Perhaps. There is much we still do not understand, but one thing is clear, the Kralix chose you. And in doing so, it has made us question everything we thought we knew." Mia smiled faintly, resting her hand on the Kralix's sleek fur. "Maybe it's time you start learning from it, instead of controlling it." Korath didn't respond, but the look in his eyes suggested he was beginning to understand. For the first time, Mia felt a glimmer of hope, not just for herself, but for the Zarquil and the Kralix. Together, they were beginning to forge a bond that transcended species, cultures, and even galaxies. The Zarquil ship sailed silently through the void of space, its sleek hull glinting faintly in the light of distant stars. Inside, the mood was palpably different. What had begun as mockery and disdain toward the human girl had shifted into something far more complex, a mixture of curiosity, respect, and perhaps even admiration. Mia sat in the observation deck beside the Kralix, who now accompanied her everywhere. Its massive body rested against the transparent walls, its glowing crimson eyes half-closed as it purred softly. The once imposing guards now kept a respectful distance, their fear of the Kralix tempered by their awe of its bond with the human girl. Korath entered the room, his long strides purposeful but less sharp than before. He carried a sleek, tablet-like device, its surface shimmering with alien symbols. "Mia Carter," he began, his tone formal but not unkind, "we have reached a decision." Mia straightened in her seat, her pulse quickening. For weeks, she had endured their scrutiny, their tests, and their skepticism. Now, it seemed, the moment of reckoning had arrived. "We will soon return to Earth," Korath continued, his opalescent eyes locking onto hers. "But before we do, the Zarquil Council has agreed to offer you a choice." Mia tilted her head, intrigued. "What kind of choice?" Korath gestured toward the observation window, where the endless expanse of the galaxy stretched before them. "You may return to your home, carrying with you the knowledge you have gained and the honor of being the first human to establish a meaningful connection with the Kralix. Or—" He paused, his gaze flicking briefly to the massive feline. "You may remain with us, as an emissary of humanity and a companion to the Kralix. Together, you could help us explore the possibilities of this bond and foster a deeper understanding between our species." Mia's heart leapt. Stay with the Zarquil? The idea was both exhilarating and terrifying. She thought of her mother, her friends, and the familiar comforts of Earth. But she also thought of the stars, the Kralix, and the vast potential of what lay beyond her small world. Before she could answer, Korath added, "Understand that this is not a decision to be made lightly. Life among the Zarquil is challenging. Our ways are not your ways. But your presence here has shown us that there is value in perspectives unlike our own." Mia looked down at the Kralix, which lifted its head and gazed at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. In its glowing eyes, she saw trust, loyalty, and something deeper, an unspoken promise. As the hours passed, Mia wandered the ship, lost in thought. The Zarquil had treated her poorly at first, but she had won their respect. More importantly, she had formed a bond with the Kralix that defied explanation. Staying with the Zarquil meant venturing into the unknown, but wasn't that what she had always dreamed of? She stopped at a viewport, staring out at the swirling colors of a nebula. Her mind drifted to Earth, the warm glow of the sun, the hum of her hometown, and her mother's voice calling her in for dinner. She had always felt out of place there, her curiosity too big for such a small world. Yet the thought of leaving it behind forever filled her with a pang of sadness. "You are conflicted," a voice said behind her. Mia turned to see Korath. His usual arrogance was absent, replaced by something that almost resembled concern. "Yeah," Mia admitted. "It's a big decision." Korath stepped beside her, his gaze fixed on the stars. "When I was young, I faced a similar choice. To remain in the safety of my homeworld or join the exploratory fleet and embrace the uncertainty of the cosmos. I chose the latter, and though it has not always been easy, I do not regret it." Mia glanced at him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. "Were you scared?" "Yes," he admitted. "But growth often requires stepping into fear." Mia nodded slowly, her resolve hardening. She knew what she had to do. The next day, the Zarquil gathered in the central chamber, their opalescent eyes fixed on Mia. Korath stood at the front, his posture tall and regal. The Kralix sat beside Mia, its massive form exuding calm strength. "Well?" Korath asked, his tone neutral but expectant. "Have you made your decision?" Mia took a deep breath. "I have. I want to stay." A ripple of surprise passed through the assembled Zarquil. Even Korath's composed expression faltered for a moment before he gave a slight nod. "Very well," he said. "You will join us as an emissary of humanity and a companion to the Kralix. Your presence will mark the beginning of a new chapter in our understanding of your species and perhaps our own." Mia glanced at the Kralix, which let out a low, approving purr. She placed a hand on its sleek fur, feeling a surge of courage. "But I have one condition," Mia added, her voice firm. Korath raised an eyebrow. "And what is that?" "You treat the Kralix with the respect it deserves. No more using it as a weapon or a tool. It's more than that, more than you realize." The chamber fell silent. Then, to Mia's surprise, Korath inclined his head. "Agreed." As the Zarquil ship departed Earth's orbit, Mia stood on the observation deck, gazing down at the blue-and-green planet that had been her home. Her heart ached with the weight of goodbye, but it was tempered by the thrill of what lay ahead. Beside her, the Kralix pressed its massive head against her shoulder, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. She smiled, running her fingers through its sleek fur. Together, they would venture into the unknown, an unlikely pair bound by trust, courage, and the promise of a brighter future. The stars awaited, and Mia was ready.